welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program where we talk about the situation of the Catholic Church around the world. The beautiful island of Sri Lanka is a diverse country home to many religions, ethnicities, and languages. It is the land of the Sinhalese, Sri Lankan Tamils, Moors, Indian Tamils, and other ethnic groups. The country has a rich Buddhist heritage, although different religions coexist in Sri Lanka. The country's recent history has been marred by a 30-year civil war that finally ended in 2009. To know more about the Church in Sri Lanka, it is my privilege to welcome Father Indunil. Father, welcome to our program.
Welcome.
Father, you have a very particular situation in your family in regards to the coexistence of different religions. Tell us about this relationship in your family.
My mother was a Buddhist, and then when she got married, she became a Catholic. So my aunts, uncles, cousins, they are still Buddhists. And this is sort of a common thing in Sri Lanka. For example, my brother got married to a Buddhist and she became a Catholic before marriage. And my sister also got married to a Buddhist. So mixed marriages is a common thing in Sri Lanka.
So no wonder one of your expertise is precisely the Interreligious Dialogue.
Yes, I'm working at the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue since 2012. I'm the Undersecretary, and also I'm in charge of Buddhism, Confucianism, Shintoism, and Taoism.
And Sri Lanka, Father, is really a very special case of coexistence of all these different religions. Father, we're now going to see a short video about the situation of Sri Lanka nowadays. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to watch this short video about Sri Lanka.
The island nation of Sri Lanka, often called the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, offers a diverse array of attractions within its compact dimensions. Scarred by more than 25 years of civil war, today Sri Lanka is on an uneasy path to healing. The Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka is a tropical island in the Indian Ocean just off the southern tip of India. An ancient civilization took root on the island first with the arrival of the Sinhalese from India in the 6th century BC and later Buddhism in the 3rd century BC. The might and wonder of the Kingdom of Sri Lanka developed in the former capital city of Anuradhapura, which maintained ties with the Roman Empire and Europe through its highly prized cinnamon and spice export. The Portuguese, calling the island Callao or Ceylon, colonized much of the coastal areas in the 16th century, pushing the Sinhalese into the higher elevated interior of Kandy. The Dutch took control in the mid-1600s, giving up their rule to the British in 1796, who transformed their colony with roads and rail lines. They established coffee plantations that would eventually transform into tea plantations famous the world over. Ceylon became a sovereign state in 1948, eventually changing its name to Sri Lanka. After independence, ethnic tensions would surface when the Sinhalese Buddhist majority asserted its nationalist views through various laws and the mass deportation of Indian Tamils working in the tea plantations. In the face of continued discrimination, Tamil disillusionment grew. A small group, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, or the Tamil Tigers, turned violent, demanding an independent state. In 1983, the Sri Lankan army was pulled into a long 25-year civil war with the Tamil Tigers, which claimed as many as 100,000 lives and displaced many others. Today, allegations of massive human rights abuses and war crimes by both sides in the last stages of the conflict remain unexplained. Criticism and investigation into the matter have been suppressed by the government. The economy of Sri Lanka has picked up steam after the civil war. Tourists have returned to enjoy the enchanting coastline and the natural and cultural wonders of the interior lands. Traditionally centered around cash crop agriculture and export of tea, rubber, gemstones, coconuts and various spices, Sri Lanka has shifted to textiles and garments as the country's biggest exports. Remittances from abroad also contribute to the gross domestic product. Although the economic rebound is significant, the predominantly Tamil north and east remain lagging behind. The estimated population of Sri Lanka is 21.8 million. Ethnically, some 74% of the population is Sinhalese, while 14% are Tamil and 9% are Sri Lankan Moors. Sri Lanka is the oldest continually Buddhist country in the world. Theravada Buddhism, which arrived on the island in the 3rd century BC, is practiced by 70% of the population. Hinduism is the second largest religion and is practiced by Sri Lankan Tamils, who have been present on the island since the 2nd century BC. The country is in many ways a model for religious coexistence. However, there has been a resurgence of Sinhalese Buddhist nationalism with extremist groups like Buddhu Bala Sena or Buddhist Power Force, which has attacked Christian churches and preachers as well as Muslim communities. Christianity was present in Sri Lanka before colonial times, taking root along Indian Ocean trade routes. With the arrival of the Portuguese and their missionaries in the 16th century, Christianity made significant inroads. When the Dutch took control, they encouraged their own missionaries of the Dutch Reformed Church. The British, in turn, allowed Anglican and other Protestant missionaries to evangelize. Today, about 8% of the population is Christian, with Roman Catholics numbering about 1.2 million.
Welcome back to our program Where God Weeps. We're talking with Father Indunil from Sri Lanka. Father, in the island, particularly Buddhism is quite relevant. It has a very strong presence. What is the relationship specifically with Buddhism? And you are an expert in Buddhism yourself.
Yeah, Buddhism has more than 2,500 years of history in Sri Lanka. And over 69% of the population are Buddhists. And then we have Muslims, about 8%, and Christians, about 7%, and about 15% Hindus. So Buddhism is very much rooted in the Sri Lankan culture. During the colonial period, Buddhism suffered a lot. So that wound is still there in their mind. But when we look at the history, Buddhism has contributed a lot to defend the cultural values of the society. And then the monks give a leading play a leading role in defending the traditional values of the society. When there is an attack, when there is a threat to these values, they organize and protest. So Buddhism is very much rooted in Sri Lankan culture, and sometimes we see this in the political field as well.
You're talking about these values. Can you give us an example of what kind of values they promote and they preserve in Sri Lankan society?
Yeah, the Buddhist values come from Buddhism, like values of other religions come from their main teachings. So the first is respect for life, and then hospitality, and silence, contemplative life, and also honesty. These are universal values we find in all religions. Especially Buddhists are very sensitive to respect for life, even for the animals, because this is the first precept of Buddhism, Panatipata, Veramani, Sikha, Padam, Samadhyani, abstaining from killing all living beings, not only human beings. So these values are still there in spite of some ups and downs, yes.
They really define what the Sri Lankan culture could be seen like.
Yeah, Buddhism has contributed a lot to shape, model the Sri Lankan culture. Because we cannot talk about Sri Lanka without talking about Buddhism. It has a long history, and it has shaped the cultural values of the people. Culture means a simple definition would be way of life, way of living. So Sri Lankan way of living is being shaped, modeled by Buddhist culture. And this we see even today, in spite of the fact that secularization, modernization are threatening to weaken these values.
And that's one of your fields of expertise. What is the appropriate way to understand interreligious dialogue?
Next year we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Vatican document which is related to interreligious dialogue, Nostra Aetate. That really a revolutionary document with open church to enter into dialogue with other religions. Nostra Aetate says the Catholic Church rejects nothing that is good and holy in other religions. So that sort of positive approach was introduced by the Vatican II. And why we need dialogue? We need dialogue because we know that God is the Father of all. God has spoken to all humanity. So when we try to dialogue with the other religions, it is not only, it is a dialogue, we enter into the mystery of God. So it is a dialogue of heart. And then also we need today interreligious dialogue because dialogue helps to overcome prejudices. In the past, among religions, there had been prejudices, conflicts, tensions. So dialogue helps us to overcome prejudices and also to understand the others, know more about the others.
Get to know,
yeah.
One of the most important
and then
parts.
Overcoming prejudices, getting to know the other better leads to a better cooperation, because interreligious dialogue leads to interreligious cooperation. Ignorance is a danger today. Ignorance leads to prejudice. Prejudice leads to conflict. On the other hand, dialogue leads to understanding and also mutual collaboration.
I think it's very important to understand the real meaning of this kind of interreligious dialogue, because sometimes people get confused with this idea of recognizing the good in other religions. Some people might think, well, what is the church saying? That all religions are the same, that there is salvation out of the church, that we're trying to identify the same God with another name. How can we be aware of these risks and not fall into these misinterpretations, Father?
Interreligious dialogue aims at knowing the other better, as I mentioned earlier, and also to see how God is acting in them. Interreligious dialogue avoid relativism, syncretism. And when you enter into the dialogue table, we say that you should not leave behind your identity. You enter into the dialogue table with your religious identity. And it is the dialogue with your identity that you speak, you share your Christian experience with your brother or sister of another religion or religions. And they share their experience, a Buddhist experience or Hindu experience or Islamic Muslim experience. So on one hand, dialogue also gives you an opportunity to proclaim. In the dialogue, indirectly, you proclaim your faith, that you are a Christian, that your identity comes from the experience in the risen Lord. You share the joy, as Pope Francis said, that encounter of Jesus Christ. And then when you share, dialogue is also listening. It is not only talking. You talk and also you leave a space for the others to talk. And in this conversation dialogue, you see that God is also present in other religions. God is the Father of all. And then some sort of respect we have towards the other. It doesn't mean that we are all the same.
You just mentioned a very important word, respect. Do you think, Father, with the recent events around the world, with fundamentalism, fanaticism, I mean, we naturally identified with Islam, but it really happens with all different faiths. So in this environment of extremism and fundamentalism, how can we have this dialogue and this respect?
We often hear about fundamentalism today, especially Islam fundamentalism. But we have Hindu fundamentalism, we have Buddhist fundamentalism, and we also have Christian fundamentalism. And what is fundamentalism? Fundamentalism, sort of exclusivism. Why fundamentalism is spreading today? Then we have to analyze it. Because today the world is going through a radical change because of globalization. Globalization has positive aspects, but globalization also excluding many people from its system. And also globalization, especially globalization of the culture, threatens the traditional cultures. And here you have poor people, you have here people with uncertainty because the change is very radical, and then we have here also excluded insecurity. Uncertainty, insecurity, and radical changes confuse us. And there isn't a political ideology, because after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, communism, there is no political ideology to resist this. Now today, religion is called upon to replace political ideology, and religions become takes the place of a political ideology. And religion in itself has a universal vision. It embraces all. Now, religions becomes a particular ideology, and it limits often to a particular group, and it loses its ideology. It is universality. So today we have fundamentalism has a religious face, but you have to analyze it sociologically to find out what are the real causes for religious fundamentalism. Religious fundamentalism, real causes you find in socio-economic politic roots. So what we have as a religious conflict, if you see one group of people claiming as religious people killing another, is not, it's more than a religious conflict. It's sort of a what you call frustration, and also this uncertainty, insecurities, injustices. That doesn't mean that we can justify violence. Violence cannot be justified. So if you want really, if we need to find a solution to these conflicts that is spreading like a wildfire, we have to have what you call a balanced economy in the world, global system, justice in the world, and special care for the poor. What we see is worsening the situation, because we try to suppress this group only with arms, and then it add fuel to the fire. Violence cannot be justified, as popes have repeatedly said. Violence is against the will of God. It doesn't reflect a true religion. At the same time, we have to find out why a group of people are reacting violently. What are the socio-economic political causes for them? And then we'll have to remedy those causes to stop the spread of violence.
Very, very interesting answer, Father, and I would love to continue in this line, our conversation. However, I would really like to touch the topic of reconciliation, especially in your country. You had a very painful civil war for, I don't know, almost 3 decades, between particularly the Tamil and the Sinhalese. And part of this political conflict got involved also some of the faiths, of some of the religions. So it's the exact example of what you were talking about. So what is the church doing in this reconciliation process, Father?
In Sri Lanka, we lived with the war, and we know how much people are wounded because of the war. And also, I have written on this, the importance of reconciliation and the contribution of the Catholic Church. People are wounded very much. And then, in spite of the cessation of hostilities, the war, the wounds continue. So the Church has a special role to play in Sri Lanka in the reconciliation process, because it's the Church which has both ethnic groups, Sinhalese and Tamils. But unfortunately, Church has also a human dimension. The war also, tensions affect the Church, its members. So the first thing the Church has to do is to overcome its wounds. Now what is important is we all have a mission of reconciliation. Jesus, the risen Lord, wounded and killed a victim. When he rose from the dead, his first words to his disciple, "Shalom, peace be with you." He doesn't talk about the wounds. And then again he says, "Peace be with you." And then he shows the wounds before sending the disciples. Then he sends, "As the Father sends me, I send you." So he gives his mission to his disciple. And before that, the disciples go through a healing process, because with wound, you cannot do the mission of reconciliation. You create further wounds. So here, Church has a very important role in the process of reconciliation, and Church is doing in this field in spite of some difficulties. And we know church has many projects to link North and South, and also many programs to bring different students and then meeting them and then giving space to talk to each other. And these things help, because 30 years of war, people are wounded. Within 1 week, within 1 month, you cannot cancel all these wounds.
Very painful.
Very painful. It needs time. There are mothers who have lost their children, and there are children who have seen violence. There are child soldiers. There are widows, over 80,000 widows in Sri Lanka. There are soldiers who are maimed, victims. So the whole Sri Lanka is crying, wounded. We see the crucified Christ everywhere. To this context, church has a very powerful message: the risen Lord, the reconciliation. And church is trying, has been a minority in collaboration with other religions. Church has to play a greater role in this process of reconciliation.
That was really powerful image, Father, what you presented about a wounded Jesus that resurrects and then gives peace. Father, unfortunately, we run out of time, but thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation. I really enjoyed this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in another program of Where God Weeps. If you want to learn more about the situation of the church in Sri Lanka and about Interreligious Dialogue, we encourage you to contact the information at the end of this program. Thank you, and God bless.